Hello and welcome to Spirit Pig. This is the show that explores how to live a fulfilled life. I'm Duncan CJ and today I'm speaking with Daniel Pinchbeck. Daniel is the author of Breaking Open the Head, a psychedelic journey into the heart of contemporary shamanism. Also, Notes from the Edge Times and 2012 Return of Quetzalcoatl, as well as his latest book, How Soon Is Now. He's the co-founder of the web magazines Reality Sandwich and Evolver.net, and his essays and articles have been featured in the New York Times Magazine, Esquire, Rolling Stone, among many others. And he's also written columns for Conscious Living and Dazed and Confused, and is invited to speak at conferences all around the globe. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I know that one of the influences were some of the ideas of the late Buckminster Fuller. What in particular of Buckminster Fuller inspired you to write this?
Buckminster Fuller was a design scientist, 20th century hero. He created the geodesic dome and all these other amazing inventions. He wrote a few books in the 60s, short books that are still really relevant. One is called Utopia or Oblivion. Another one is called Operation Spaceship Earth. And back then, he kind of realized that, we had the technical ability and the resources to make the world work for everybody on it while supporting, the community of life and the planet's ecology. But we were trapped by our political and economic structures, ideologies. So he felt we needed like a profound design revolution to liberate our technical capacities to help humanity. And that's basically what the book is all about, trying to think about what that design revolution would be comprehensively, like what it would mean in terms of our, technical systems, energy, industry, farming, what it would mean for our political and economic systems, and what it would mean for consciousness, like culture and media and ideology and so on.
And I know that if you look at the state of the world, you turn on the news and it's yes, we are at a crisis point, but we can view this not necessarily as sort of doom and gloom, but perhaps as a sort of rite of passage or initiation for humanity as a species, isn't it?
That's one of the main ideas of the book. A lot of my work is one of the main focuses has been kind of initiation. And if you look at all these tribal and traditional societies around the world, they always have these initiation rites of passage that separate kind of the adolescents and the immature, members of the community from being adults. And our kind of, we've kind of dismissed the knowledge of these traditional societies and their ways of doing things as not very important. But I actually think we're in a kind of initiation crisis in a way. Like, if you look at somebody like Trump or something and all the people that he surrounded himself with, it's kind of like unbridled greed and self-interest. It's me. It's this focus on, control and power and so on. I think that, in a way is because we've lost initiation. Like they didn't have to go through some type of process where they, recognize that they were responsible for the larger community. And it may be that these initiations are not just cultural events, but actually almost have a neurophysiological function. And that we have the neocortex, which is the part of our brain that makes us distinctly human, which has developed in the last 100,000 years. And that's how come we can use language and plan for the future. But it also means that we get easily locked into kind of, an ego-based identity. And unless you have transpersonal visionary experiences, you don't have a larger sense of yourself as like maybe part of a cosmic whole or something like that. So I think the ecological crisis in a positive sense could be seen as an initiation or rite of passage for humanity. We need to break through our ego structures and our kind of the systems that we've created, which are really dysfunctional at the moment, and come up with something better.
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, it's often like sort of ancient traditions and myths and are often sort of dismissed or thought of as not relevant today, but it's probably the complete opposite. Like, have you read some Joseph Campbell before?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I talk about him. Maybe I mentioned him in the book. I mean, he looked at initiations as being this kind of like three-stage process where, particularly men, but also young women also would be taken out. They would be separated from the community. They would have to go through these ordeals or take ayahuasca or peyote or do fastings or sun dances. And then there would be a return. They would be welcomed back into the community, and the knowledge they had gained would be recognized as valuable for the tribe's continuation.
Yeah, and I mean, 150 years ago, the idea that we could fly was laughable. I mean, it was like it was seen as ridiculous, and yet we figured that out. And whenever we have these sort of, I think you talk about when there's enough sort of energy and excitement behind an idea. It doesn't matter how grand or big it is. Whether putting people on the moon or like the Wright brothers, when there's an excitement and a drive behind an idea, then anything can be figured out, anything is possible. And so do we need to take that same sort of mindset to these big sort of issues which are facing us today?
Yeah, you got it. That's exactly the idea. And in a way, like, we've become very used to innovations and technologies and industries and so on. We don't think of evolving our social systems and our ways of relating to each other, in the same way. And so I'm very intrigued by all sorts of experiments that point towards ways we could redesign our, systems, even in terms of relationships. Like, there's a whole section on love and relationships and community that proposes that maybe, monogamy is a limited construct that we've gotten sort of trapped into.
Well, you're actually talking about the idea of like monogamy and how we might be using outdated things. This whole idea of like the nuclear family or monogamy, like maybe that's fine for some people, but by saying that this is the way, then maybe that's actually almost quite damaging for people where it's not an authentic expression of who they are.
Well, we know it's, problematic. I mean, if we look at the U.S. election, Trump and his philandering and his comments about women, and Hillary Clinton's husband, Bill Clinton, and his philandering, and, all these sex scandals that erupt with these, major political figures and power figures. I mean, it seems that one reason that, men seek power and wealth is to have sexual access. And, as long as that's the only way for that to be achievable, then men will keep trying to, control and dominate in that sense. So the alternative would be a different culture, a different understanding, between the genders around sexuality. And I looked at that in particular in relationship to a community in Portugal called Tamara that was started by German radicals who were part of the left in the 60s and 70s. And they tried to understand why these kind of utopian yearnings of these movements failed. And as they began to explore it, they realized that it was like these issues of love and sexuality and jealousy and envy and possessiveness that ultimately were like very deep political issues that society couldn't address. So they kind of stepped outside of society and sought to create a different social model based on, non-possessive, transparent relating with a lot of social tools that allow, the communities and the individuals in it to kind of mediate these alternative structures.
Yeah, Tamira is a fascinating place. I visited it in August.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I went there in August, and what do they say? There's there can be no peace on earth as long as there's so much war between the sexes, and how it's absolutely fascinating place. I spent 2 weeks there just to learn and understand, like, of their ideas and views. Absolutely fascinating. I'm
going to try to go back to their love school in May. Maybe you should come.
So you're going in May, are you?
I'm going to try to. I don't know if I can make it, but I've been to one of their love schools, and it was really fascinating. I mean, it's actually a place I really want to spend more time in because I really believe in what they're doing. I mean, in some ways, they're kind of. I mean, it definitely feels like a laboratory. Like, they're very interested in developing this very certain kind of a line. And for some people, in some ways, it's actually kind of old-fashioned. Like, the music is kind of like folk music and so on. But in a way, yeah, it's like these experiments are necessary to create something new. And their idea is that if there were a few, working models like Tamara, it becomes something like a new template, for more parts of the culture to adopt. And I'm seeing that in New York too. I mean, a lot of experimentation now with alternative relationship patterns, like a general realization that it's not really working out. And obviously we see it with younger kids, the millennials, like the hookup culture and Tinder and all that stuff. But it's not a social. It's not a social redesign. Like, you have to think about how children are taken care of, right? Because one reason that women, prefer strongly monogamy is they know that if they have children, it's like an 18-year investment of time and energy, and you need to have a support structure for that. So they look for men who can create that support structure. But if you had a community that was able to hold child care, as a community responsibility, then women are also much more liberated to pursue their own ideas and plans and so on, develop themselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I bought a camera guy and an audio guy with me, and actually filmed like haven't edited it yet, but I've started filming like a mini documentary about the place and actually interviewing the founders and cover their views on kind of what they were trying to achieve. It's a hugely interesting subject. You said that the sort of current political economic system that we live in keeps everyone in a state of artificial scarcity. What do you mean by artificial scarcity?
Well, I mean, the economic system is founded on competition. I mean, money is created by debt, and it's created in a way that it creates winners and losers, and fear and scarcity. So if you go to a bank to get a loan, the bank issues you the loan, they create that money, but the interest on that loan isn't created. So you have to then go and compete against everyone in society to bring back the interest. It's like our society is basically founded on a kind of dog-eat-dog competition model. And, there could be a different way of organizing things, but it would require, like changes in, the instrument that we use to exchange value. In the book, I talked about different ideas of alternative currencies or different ways to exchange value. One idea is to have like a negative interest currency, like a trading currency that's global, that actually loses value when you try to hold on to it. So instead of hoarding it, you want to circulate it when you have it.
The ideas of, I think there's the Italian philosopher you talked about, Antonio Negri, and he talks about the production of subjectivity. And we don't think about it, but subjectivity is actually something that is very produced. How so?
Good. Yeah, I can see you studied hard. I really appreciate that. It's exciting. Yeah, sure. Well, in a sense, capitalism and consumer culture and the media, the corporate media, is a very powerful instrument of, indoctrination, and it essentially constructs people's consciousness and subjectivity in a certain way. So every day they're waking up and they're listening to TV and the radio, and they're being told what to buy, how to respond to authority, what types of relationships are acceptable. And so you internalize that, you integrate that. And the system is very clever because it even integrates ideas of rebellion. So it's like you're made to see yourself as a rebel. Now, for instance, like the alt-right, was very clever in the US at creating this kind of rebel ideology. So people are, it's like, oh, this is the new punk rock now to be right wing, but they're not recognizing that they're actually falling into a trap of this control system, because that ideology benefits a small oligarchic elite who can then manipulate a society for their own ends. So subjectivity. I mean, I think Terence McKenna said that culture is our operating system. We can't use language without creating story or operating on myths. And as human beings, we're based in myth and story. Like we can't even open a door or go across the room unless we have a story underlying what we're doing. Unlike an animal, which just like hunts and seeks nourishment and rest and so on. So the governing stories and myths are really crucial for how our society works and operates. And I believe some of those stories and myths have kind of reached their endpoint where they're not serving us anymore. They're just very destructive. And we have to think about what are some of the new governing myths or stories that would, help us create a more holistic and healthy planetary culture.
Talking about those stories and I guess the spread and the dissemination of these ideas and stories, you think that what is necessary is a very powerful counter media. What would that look like in your mind?
Well, I mean, that's, my ideal would be, and I don't know how this is going to happen, but there needs to be something kind of like a CNN or Fox News on a global scale that's focused on, what can we do together? What are the solutions? What are the practical tools? The media that, one way that it controls people's responses is by being very fear-based. So you're always seeing, what's horrible, and we got to be scared of Muslims. We have to be scared of war, and so on. So I think on a large scale, ultimately we need some alternative media system, and obviously there are lots of little counter media efforts going on, like yours and a million others. But at the moment the mass consciousness is more shaped by these more negative programming.
Yeah. No, when I saw about counter media, I mean, I totally agree that something like that is needed, a whole new sort of system. And it's interesting because when you were talking about the prefrontal cortex, but it was our ancient brain is, I think, about at least sort of 10 times more drawn to fear and danger, because, I don't know, saber-toothed tigers. And so it'd have to be at least 10 times more power and more money and more push behind it than just this negative media. So it's a huge effort, but collectively, if there's enough, I don't know, it's such a tricky one because you need, we're so drawn to that negativity, the gossip magazines, the war, the famine. And so this is then just fed and feeded by, the Fox Newses, because they know how, we're so drawn to it. And so, yeah, it takes a big effort to get that sort of counter media going. I would love something out there. I'm with you there.
So yeah, what you're talking about is the amygdala, which is like our flight and fight response. So the way the media, keeps people addicted and hypnotized is by constantly like hitting, on the amygdala. We're sort of working on people's lower instincts, and that's sort of fits in with this whole idea of initiation. That if people became more kind of self-aware, more able to go into like a witness consciousness, so they're aware that they're being programmed and what the programs are, then they have more of the inner fortitude to kind of deal with it and choose something else.
Yeah, I found it absolutely fascinating learning about one of your, I think he's one of your favorite thinkers, Walter Benjamin, who died during the Nazi era, and about his views on the reasons for events like the First World War. Would you mind sharing those?
No, of course not. I mean, so he, between the wars, he wrote about how he felt that humanity had this internal need. Like we have a push, something about us, like we push towards the edge, we seek intensity. And ultimately, I think it's this yearning for transcendence, for something outside of the normal. And the problem is that can either be constructed through, culturally prescribed kind of positive ceremonies and rituals, like, like these initiations that tribal people do, or without those, it becomes something that happens more unconsciously through like destructions, through wars and violence. And once again, I really feel that's happening. I can feel the U.S. kind of has fallen into kind of like a collective psychosis or a hypnosis or a trance that's seeking some kind of cathartic release, maybe through destruction or violence or war or something. Whereas if the younger people were guided through a process of becoming more aware of their own, psyche and of their own desires and given a different story about who they are, they would have a very different outcome.
Yeah. So there's this kind of innate in us, all of us, this need to, I think, commingle with cosmic powers. I think is how it was put, and I just love that idea of like there's something, and we just need that connection.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, that's what Benjamin talked about, and and in the book, I suggest that maybe even the ecological crisis is something that we've subconsciously created for ourselves to bring about some type of cathartic transformation.
Yeah. Something that you know to be the case is that we, and this is, I guess, this would be an interesting one to talk about, is that we possess tremendous psychic abilities as human beings. Why do you feel that?
Well, that's something that I didn't, I grew up as a scientific materialist and a skeptic. So I didn't really believe. I mean, I thought that consciousness was just based in the brain. But then, and as I discussed in my first two books, Breaking Open the Head in 2012, when I began to visit tribal societies and go through initiations and psychedelic, shamanic experiences, it sort of opened up my own psychic abilities in a way. Like I began to have like tons of synchronicities and kind of other crazy things just happen, like telepathy or precognition, or shamans would beam into stuff and tell me things about my past that they couldn't have known through ordinary channels, and even more occult phenomena and so on. So I began to realize that, what all these mystical traditions and occult traditions talk about is really the case, or, really I shifted over to like Carl Jung's way of articulating that there's a kind of collective psyche, there's a collective unconscious, there are these archetypal forces, that there's a psychophysical connection between our inner self and the larger world. And that's very much what a lot of these traditional cultures believe and talk about. And so maybe, we're pushing ourselves into this crisis as the only way that'll force us to, actually access our latent capacities or psychic abilities.
Yeah, I've been watching, following some of the stuff and some of the work of Dr. Dean Radin, and I know that you've mentioned him, and I think your reference was how Dr. Dean Radin describes it almost as like our current knowledge of parapsychology could be compared to our knowledge of electricity in the late 18th century. What was that connection?
Well, I mean, we forget, like, first of all, it's incredible. We discovered electricity in the late 18th century, and we it took a number of generations of experiment. Like first they were like, wow, this is like a super powerful force. But they didn't know how you could store it or channel it or transmit it or make use of it. And once we figured that out, we were able to, change the whole nature of the planet, like geopolitical, so the, sort of the geophysical nature of the planet through our industries and our technologies and so on. So yeah, the idea that Dean Radin suggests and other thinkers have also suggested is that maybe the next threshold of, or the next form of energy that we're going to figure out how to make use of is psychic energy. And at the moment, we know it exists, but we don't have any way to reliably make use of it or access it.
And so, yeah, so once we can figure that out, then it would potentially open up this whole new wave of.
There's great evidence. Like you can see videos of Indonesian masters of chi who can like throw people across the room with their energy, or through different like Taoist practices, they learn how to like kind of amass a lot of the energy, and then they can heal with it or cause electrical shocks or whatever. It's quite amazing.
So right now, when you there's obviously, you look around and you can if you look for stuff to, I don't know, there's countless stuff that could get you down and be despondent, but there's also stuff to be excited about. What is exciting you in your research or your work? What's giving you hope, optimism, excitement?
Well, it's pretty much a lot of what I included in the book, these different experiments and possibilities. It does feel like there's a lot of gloom and doom right now. And I do feel, the more that I look into what's happening with the U.S., takeover of the government, it does feel like a resurgence of something very close to a neo-Nazism or neo-fascism. And, I'm concerned that we're going to have to go through another very, very dark and destructive phase that could lead to a lot of loss of life and God knows what, so it's a worrying time, but, I stand by the theories in the book that maybe it has to get to this critical level so that we, make these changes that we're capable of.
What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
Well, personally, I'm somebody who feels like very driven by having like a mission in a way. And, the work has definitely been my mission. What gets me up in the morning and keeps me excited about being alive. And, I definitely feel that we are living in a time of tremendous transition and crisis and opportunity. So I think if we look at that almost as like, it's almost like we're in an incredible, movie or video game. And, there's the possibility that we can get to the next level of the video game, which, might involve things like extraterrestrial contact and interstellar travel and, the development of our psychic abilities. But first, we need to address the situation that we're at right now. And the only way to do that, I think, is to, break out of our, tendency towards detachment and distraction and say like, okay, like this is actually something that I care about really deeply.
What is one thing all our listeners can start doing today that will have a positive impact on their lives?
Well, in the book, I put down a lot of ideas for what people could do. I feel like, first of all, understanding the situation is really necessary. And that's really why I felt the book was necessary, because I felt like on the side of the left or the progressives or cultural creatives, like, we don't really have a coherent sense of what we all want to do together. Like what's the world that we want to make together? What does it actually feel like and look like, and how would it operate? So I felt we needed that. So we need to have a shared understanding, like coherence. And then we also individually, community building is really important. Connecting people who share the same values, reaching out to people who don't share those values, sort of realizing that we have to reduce our use of resources in the next period to ultimately create, more of a society that would be good for everybody. But everybody has their own individual path, so depending on their skills, like some people are media makers, some people are lawyers, some people are gardeners. So, each person has to follow their own dharma in that sense.
Yeah. Last but not least, how can people find out more about you and your work? Where can we send them?
There's a website for the book, howsoonisnow.info. They can join for the mailing list. I have a Twitter account. I'm on Facebook. They can follow me. Pretty receptive. People get interested in the ideas and write me, emails or whatever. Yeah, I guess those are some of the ways. Pinchbeck.io is my original website also.
Daniel, thank you so much for speaking to me today. I really appreciate it.